When it comes to Disney in the modern era, the film you would probably think of the most is Frozen, and it's not hard to see why. Because Frozen and Frozen 2 remain to be one of the highest grossing animated films of all time and one of the most beloved modern franchises in the Disney canon. But nowadays, about 10 years after this film was released, this film is actually regarded as painfully overrated and a mediocre mess, an opinion that I have grown myself over the years after the film was released. Because when the movie was released, it was literally my most favorite Disney movie ever, and everyone actually seemed to agree with that opinion, where I thought I was the biggest fan who didn't own any merchandise of the film, but just loved it for what it was and what it had, especially Elsa, because she was actually my first fictional crush, which I actually hate that I have to admit to now, but understandable because I was 12 at the time and now I am 21, and I really hate most of the things that happen in the film and of course Elsa herself. But don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily hate the film or the main characters of Elsa and Anna. I still think it's good overall for what it did at Disney at the time, and I still get down with it on rewatch like I've done with The Incredibles 2, just enjoying the journey without caring for the plot in any way. But today I'm actually caring about the plot in every way, and quite frankly, this movie really does stink. Because when you revisit the overall plot and circumstances characters like Elsa, Hans, and Kristoff go through in the entire film, it really becomes a pathetic mess that isn't worth watching. Where you notice how I didn't include Anna in this picture because they actually figured out her character for the most part from the very start, where despite being annoying in some instances, her journey is actually complete and interesting and worthy of being the film's main hero, where everyone else in this film do not fulfill their roles very well. The roles that they were intended for were actually ruined and switched around by the stuff they actually did during the production process. I mean, I would also exclude Olaf from that conversation because he actually does also work fine with the connection between Elsa and Anna and provided some decent comedic relief for the film, which is something the sequel would also forget to balance because of how everything fell so apart so fast in that film that made stuff like his appearance so unbearable. And that is a topic to discuss on another day because Frozen 2 is quite frankly worse than this film in all regards. But beside that, the biggest thing that holds this movie back from being good is Hans himself. If you watch me, you would already know the various problems he brings to the film as a villain that is hard to deny for anyone, being the progenitor of Disney's terrible twist villains and modern villains in general, in of course being the main villain of this very film. And the concept of villains in this very film is what makes Frozen a pathetic mess overall because of how it relates to Elsa's character in that regard. Because if you look at the production of Frozen, you notice that all earlier drafts of the film had Elsa as the villain in most instances, where Hans wasn't even a character yet. The core concept of the film of course was focusing on Anna and Elsa's characters, where the finale that we got in the film remained completely the same. Something that I think would actually make the story more emotional in the fact that the hero and villain of the film were actually siblings, and this is something you actually notice more and more when watching the finished film that they wanted to go for but ruined it, all because of things like the song Let It Go that made her more sympathetic and forced them to make a twist to Anna's love story with characters like Kristoff, who actually had no real screen time whatsoever to flesh out his character in his background. I mean, honestly, there's literally nothing that he really offers overall in this franchise other than the fact that he's the one for Anna in her quest for love. Like really, there is no connection to him other than what Anna had with Hans. Their backgrounds early in this story makes more sense in their relationship than anything that Kristoff and Anna has in this film, as we will see. And it's something made worse considering that the previous films like Tango proved how much this doesn't make any sense with Rapunzel and Eugene's relationship that I will also go into. And with all of those major points out of the way, let's just go back at the very beginning of the story to see where all the problems actually line up in the film, where we have this very strong opening in the credits with the Vualai, the Sami folk song that represents the region that Frozen takes place in, with Arendelle being in Norway. I wanted to highlight this because of how powerful I felt this was as an introduction when the film was released, and of course now on rewatch. It really captures the spirit of the film that they tried to portray with the snowflakes, where I really do look back upon it fondly to introduce us to the world of Frozen. It was just something that seemed different at the time for a film like Frozen, but then of course led us to the Frozen heart sequence. sequence, something I actually thought was powerful at first too, with the shot that they were going for, but just now seems forgettable when you think about the details of this, because this sequence is supposed to introduce us to Kristoff and Sven's characters as children. The real problem I have with this sequence is how you don't really get much of Kristoff and Sven's relationship with the rest of the Ice Cutters, how you don't get much of his very background. I mean, they don't even exist after this song, and Kristoff just falls behind them as we see later when we see the king and queen helping Anna and Elsa. They just straight up ignore him, and we don't get any clear picture of his background and his relationship other than what he likes to do in ice cutting. Like seriously, where is his father? Is he part of the group of Icemen? What about his mother? We do not know much about these details, even though he's introduced very early on with this group of Icemen like they're part of his family. There's just so much here that lacks in his background that would have been done better by cutting him off from the beginning entirely, because it has nothing for him to offer other than the fact he saw Elsa and Anna, where this troll suddenly decided to adopt him for the rest of the life, and that's where it's at for his very character. And does that make any sense? No, it really doesn't, because nothing in this film ever did, where it just cuts us back to Elsa and Anna's relationship as children and not explaining anything that Kristoff's background has to offer. This is something I have no problem, because it sets up the overall background of what this movie is trying to be about. They are siblings, Elsa has this ice power, and they have fun with each other until this accident slips from their very hands and begins the plot points that these two characters go on. The ones that causes the king and queen to rush to her aid for their daughters, where the answer lies in the trolls. And this is where you learn how useless the trolls are in this film and how annoying they are, as we will see later on when they are reintroduced for the 5 minutes of screen time they have overall. Because the original Snow Queen here by Hans Christian Andersen had the troll as a villain, not the main one, but literally the devil himself, who makes an evil mirror that distorts reality, which later shatters to infect people with its splinters that distorts sight and frees hearts, which happens to the main protagonist and gets him caught up with the main antagonist, the Snow Queen, where you can literally see even more of a reason why Elsa should have been the main villain, because the story had the Snow Queen as that very main antagonist, where this scene shows how stupid Grandpappy Troll really is, where despite his wisdom and knowledge to help Anna from freezing, he's very stupid to wipe her memories away, where he instills this fear into Elsa about what happens if she can't control it amidst the public, really putting in the wrong kind of opinions in her own parents. Instead of trying to help her out for the better, they shut them out for the worse, limiting and locking the castle in Arendelle from the outside world for no reason other than attempting to help Elsa control her powers in the dumbest way imaginable. This is where you realize how dumb Agnar and Iduna are as parents. Like literally, if I were able to do a Disney ranking on the parents, then they would surely be at the bottom half of the table because of how idiotic this was to try to help her out, while Anna still carried positive memories about the time with her sister that Grandpappy actually still kept, where now all of a sudden she's being forced to stay inside until she turns 21. I mean, this entire sequence is terribly written unless you take that villain role into consideration. It's not written well because of how we bring Hans into the argument later on in the film, because I'm not saying Elsa is a bad character in the overall plot and what they tried to write for her, where what they brought to her is fine for the most part, but the circumstances in this very scene are just very terrible for her character overall that hinders the movie from being great because of how stupid they wrote the parents to be. Only something that would be justified into turning one character into the main villain of the plot and the other one being a hero. Like, it's baffling to even think that in the second film that they are praised by their own daughters for what they did in the kingdom and lands when they contributed to most of the problems that happen in this very film and the muddled relationship that the sisters have, considering that the memories of them hanging out and having good times are still there, that they themselves actually allowed but acted irrationally to solve a problem by shutting it out from both of them despite this very knowledge. I just really hate them because of how they are hailed in a good light for what they did in Frozen 2 and the overall story, where they themselves incited everything wrong with their relationships at the beginning of the film, where I really do see how it works better in the context of Elsa being the antagonist and makes it really harder for you to understand why they actually had to change it to Hans instead because of what we learned through the actions of her own parents. It just feels like a much better outcome to make her the villain, considering some people's reactions to Elsa's character as terribly written because of the roles that are trying to be fulfilled. Plus, this is also where my problem of how generic Disney's animation actually become, because you actually notice how Elsa's mom is literally just Elsa with brown hair. Like, that's literally her Coronation Queen model, but just turned brown, and that was basically it. But anyways, the entire sequence of Do You Want to Build a Snowman is just so poor in execution because of what is done in the background around the castle to limit their own contact. It just makes you question how Anna actually grew up to be so extroverted if she just did nothing but stick around for Elsa's attention because of what they did in the past. But sadly, Elsa ignored her, where you realize how much more you actually hate the parents because you really do not get to see them spending time with Anna to explain what is going on with her, when they spend more time trying to help Elsa control her powers by keeping her isolated and making everything worse when they eventually die. Like, there is nothing that they actually do for Anna's character other than actually showing that Elsa does not want to hang out with her sister at all. Like, there's nothing other than the reaction she has when the parents leave. It just makes it feel like they're non-existent from Anna's life, helping out the other sister and ostracizing her from the entire family, where it doesn't make sense why she is the way she is as the hero of the story. Because like I said earlier, I really didn't mind or hate both their characters for how they ended up, but just everything that surrounded them is what makes it worse, including their parents, that nobody actually acknowledges what they did was wrong in either of the films because they died. Where if they did actually acknowledge this at the end of the film, how love actually played an important factor to controlling her powers, which they suppressed to keep them separate and actually connecting with each other, then it would have been a better statement. Where it just becomes more apparent how rushed the production of the film was when they kept changing things around through songs like Let It Go for characters like Elsa to not be the villain anymore. Like, this is the moment you are supposed to clearly see, like, how these two separate at the beginning of the story to go through their journeys as the hero and the villain of the story, learning and growing from that at the very end with that very resolution, but wasn't done because somehow they just needed to subvert the typical expectation of the Disney stereotype in other ways to introduce us to characters like Hans, which makes no sense. This sequence then brings us to the present, with Kristoff being introduced for 2 seconds again before leaving him once again. Where, to be frank, this is actually more better to introduce him to the entire audience because of how we virtually learn nothing about his background other than he immediately got adopted by trolls and no questions about his real family were actually asked when he was left behind. This finally opens up the kingdom and Anna's character, excited for the chance for the first time in forever since she was a little kid that the gates are finally opened up, and finally introduces us to Hans, the worst Disney character ever. Now, you all know I've already made an entire video about him, but it's really hard not to actually talk about him because of how he actually affects everything in the story, including that very beginning that makes the film way worse. And that includes how I just talked about now, how Elsa and Anna's character developments are shallow because of the role that he is supposed to fulfill in the film. Because this is the part where Anna actually makes a connection with somebody who looks similar in style by the hair and being a prince himself, where we find out through the coronation party that they have a lot more in common than we realize, being ostracized by older siblings and whatnot. It's where we see the Duke's character for the first time too, being introduced to Arendelle, opening up for what riches he wants in trade, where you kind of already guessed that he was the one with villainous intent for the film, but also only as a side character because of what the story was focused on mainly, where it just makes Hans as a villain much more worse than you think. It is just very clear throughout the songs like First Time in Forever about the contrasting attitude of where you focus your hero and villain at. I mean, it's very different already from the original draft that had Elsa as a straight up villain who kidnaps Anna from her wedding to freeze her heart, where Anna has to get Hans to kiss and save her, where you see that's the type of story that they really wanted to focus on when Hans gets to spend time with Anna through songs like Love is an Open Door, causing her to accept his immediate marriage proposal because of what she went through and being rejected by people like her older sister. This is where you see his character being very supportive and show no signs throughout the entire sequence that he wants to kill both of them to take over the throne of Arendelle like the film actually suggests. Because nobody, not even Hans himself, is aware of the fact that he is supposed to be the main villain as we see later on in the film, because it isn't made clear at all through any of their interactions. And this is something I wanted to talk about early on because it's just a very apparent problem you notice when rewatching the film after the twist is revealed. Like, it really doesn't make any sense for you to actually watch the film now that you know his underlying motivations in the entire film, because it doesn't make any sense. I give the others a pass because of how insane this really is compared to how how you actually understand where both Anna and Elsa are reacting to because of how their parents raised them irresponsibly. The more I think about it, the more I actually really like the concept of Elsa being the misunderstood villain in this situation. It's fine to have her be a sympathetic villain because of the public perception of people with magical gifts, where it sets up a new understanding for Anna's journey and what happens overall when she leaves to go on this character arc. But sadly, you are just now constantly thinking of what Hans is thinking, and what Hans is thinking is totally stupid, because now Anna has to go to look for her, where now he gets the chance to watch over the kingdom, which is actually what he wants to take over, as we see later on in the film. And that is a decision that makes you really hate how supportive he is of Anna, but then abandons her when she returns later on in the film. It just makes you hate more of the choices and other elements of the film because of how it leads us to the most painfully mediocre song to ever exist that has been overplayed in Let It Go. Now, I do not think it's a bad song, but it's obvious how painful it sounds because of how overplayed it was and what it actually did to ruin the entire movie and the tone of what they were going for. Because this is the very song that made them rewrite Elsa to not be a villain anymore, and instead be the fearful girl that she was, being sympathetic because of her very powers. And honestly, I think it would still work well if she was the overall antagonist by the tone that they wanted to do, not caring about what happens because she is free to create and free from the fears of the public not bothering her. But then it's ruined because of how it's presented and how happy she gets in the moment, being so strong, where it just makes you wonder what exactly this does overall, that makes you wonder about the people that are now trapped in an eternal winter. Like, she doesn't know or seek to care what she has actually done when she crossed the fjord into ice that causes them to suffer under this eternal winter umbrella. It just seems so poorly communicated by that point of rewriting her being the main villain in the very beginning of the film. She just stays there and does absolutely nothing. I mean, you can make the argument that this is the result of how she was raised by and the fear she had, where now she can become fearless to let it all go without hurting anybody and the consequences of what she's actually grown under. But what exactly is this new isolation going to do for her that hasn't been already done in the opening sequence when she was forced to do that? What exactly does she actually plan to spend her time doing if Anna never came and she just had her coronation as the new queen of Arendelle? Like, she is the new ruler of this kingdom, but now she just leaves them without no rhyme or reason. It's just more obvious how apparent that forcing Hans into the villain role and removing her from that equation just makes the story more confusing. It makes her look kind of stupid no matter how you actually think of the character. Like, yeah, now you start to realize how painful Let It Go is as a song because of these other details that do not mix. I mean, sure, she knows she isn't going to hurt anyone up here, but it still doesn't excuse the fact that staying up here and abandoning everyone else without a single thought makes things even more worse than you already thought. Like, we really see Anna do care for her sister now, knowing that she has powers and trying to chase after her, where she now expects in songs like Let It Go that she can be free to create ice palaces, that they can actually solve their own problems themselves. Like, that is absolutely stupid. I mean, did I mention how stupid Elsa's parents are? Because this clearly shows their lack of parenting skills that made them terrible characters overall in this point of the film. And then you cut back to Anna, who gets winter clothes at Oaken's and reintroduces us to Kristoff once again for the second time. I mean, looking back on it, I guess this was also a fine scene to actually introduce him here rather than at the very beginning, because we still do not know much about him other than the fact he sells ice. And that's where Anna gets this idea to have him take her up the North Mountain since he already knows the way, where now you start to notice that the only thing he has to offer here is how he actually questions Anna's character for being engaged within meeting someone. Like, sure, their interactions are charming for where they are, but the intentions of the producers and the directors are very flawed by not having him fleshed out more, trying to be the overall romantical relationship for Anna's character. Because most of the time we actually see him, he just goes along helping Anna without establishing much to offer to what Anna found within connecting to Hans. It's not terrible if they just wanted to focus on the crew meeting each other to stop and save Elsa when they introduce Olaf in, but in the sense of the Disney couple, they really do not have anything to offer because the relationship isn't really there. And this is where you actually have to compare them to Rapunzel and Eugene's relationship in Tangled, because that is something that was very clear in the beginning when they actually have their adventure. How you know both both of their backgrounds to a degree and their characters and how they actually grown to learn from each other. Everything there is done well to show the relationship forming where you actually agree with them actually becoming a couple, where this one has nothing to offer because there's just so much going on at this point when Olaf becomes a main focus because of how Elsa created him and how he played a main role in their childhood back now, where he can bridge the two main characters back together with those old memories of their childhood. And that is something that made Olaf good enough as a character at the very least, where that is something the sequel forgets, that he's made to have that connection to want and spend time in Summer, which is very nice and cute, but not overall satisfying because the journey is just going to make us press more afterwards. Because this is when we cut back to Arendelle, where we cut back to Hans defending Anna and Elsa from the Duke being the real villain of this scene, where we start to notice how dumb the movie is overall constantly through these scenes because of how helpful he is trying to rescue Anna and whatnot and providing for the people of Arendelle, not being a villain at all as shown by his compassion. It is just so amazing how infuriating this has become because of that singular twist that they went for, because of how you rewatch that film with that very knowledge. You really cannot enjoy Frozen for its story because you're left with the knowledge that affects the story for the worse when they eventually find Elsa, because she's clearly supposed to be the villain in this very situation. I know I constantly say that a lot in this video, but every time I see his stupid ass face and the actions these two commit throughout the film, I'm reminded of what is clearly the intent from the original vision of the film, and how it just shows how rushed Frozen was as a film in such a troubled production, but somehow okay because the entire world gave so much love to it for some reason. Like, why did any of us actually ever love the film to begin with? There is nothing here to suggest that this is a good story because the ideas are so confused and flawed to a very high degree. This is the most painfully troubled film series ever created, and they actually never learned to fix it in subsequent productions like Frozen 2. And it becomes more painful how you notice this in scenes where like Elsa hits her sister again because their emotions being out of control, noticing that she did actually hit her, where this time it's in the heart that would actually really hurt her worse than what we discussed at the beginning. It shows us once again where the story is supposed to lie in the character's direction by creating Marshmallow 2 to kick them out, where once again it justifies Elsa's character as a villain but doesn't justify Hans' villainous arc at all because of what is being focused in the scene and the instant when Elsa is still shutting her sister out. It's fine to have what you were going for in the overall final vision of the product, but it just falls apart because of the other film's elements that hamper it overall. If you just remove Hans from that equation, from being who he was in the final film, then the film would have been fine the way it was, but it was actually not. It just makes you question why she's acting the way she is, and the reason many do not actually jive with her character in any direction at all, or anyone else, because of how flawed it was when you take that into perspective. But anyways, the solution in this scene is of course to go to the trolls because of how Kristoff saw them help them long ago, as he did as a child, which actually makes sense to why they actually brought that scene into question. But you also question how he actually doesn't recognize that this is the same princess when he was young being helped by the king and the queen, but that's fine to overlook what he wants to do and the fact that that happened like 20 years ago. But still obviously bad because of the fact he actually saw the king and queen being at there, and now he's actually helping a princess knowing that that's the queen. But this scene is made worse because of what they want to introduce us to being the most painful song in the entire film. Because like I said at the beginning, the trolls are pathetic overall, and it contradicts everything Kristoff said when he questioned Anna's decision to marry a man she just met by having them force a relationship with Kristoff and Anna throughout this song and virtually waste the time when she is actually quite literally freezing to death. It's a similar problem to the Hunchback of Notre Dame with A Guy Like You, where Fixer Upper does the same thing, being out of tone and just horribly forcing love onto the main characters that isn't quite there yet. I mean, to be fair, in the case of Hunchback, there was something for that relationship that they wanted Quasi to go through because of his connection to Esmeralda, but tonally, in that very instance, it happens after Frollo burns down Paris and songs like Hellfire, so it actually makes it worse. And similar in the case of Fixer Upper in Frozen, this one suffers from the same problem because of the context that is happening in the situation when Anna actually needs help fast, but they're just too busy contradicting Kristoff's character by forcing this love onto them when she clearly has a better connection with Hans. Like, you clearly see this is the producer's way of forcing this onto us to make us see the other side that wasn't fleshed out quite well in the overall final relationship that Anna actually gets. You cannot make us love the trolls by doing this, and knowing how they immediately stole Kristoff and Sven at a young age without any thought for his biological background or the Icemen that had him at first, you really just make us hate them instead, making us wonder if they are actually the real main villains because of what they do overall from the beginning, and here that makes situations worse, where Grandpappy comes back after she does get hits from the ice once again, unable to stop it because it hit the heart, and giving very vague act of true love statements to try and fix things. I mean, it's fine for the message of what should be able to fix things for Elsa and Anna in love, but then again, it's overall stupid because of the characters and the trolls being so vague as the twist that is coming to ruin things, where once again, we switch back to Hans to show what true love's kiss is going to do to solve things. And this scene is stupid because he wants no harm done to Elsa, where the Duke's guards are ordering him to do harm to Elsa. Very clear in the way she acts to defend herself as being portrayed as the villain to others. This is a scene that also once again makes it very clear from the beginning that Hans is not supposed to be the villain at all, because he saves Elsa from being killed in that situation, where his intentions that we know of finally was actually to kill Elsa in some way after connecting with Anna. Like, knowing that, why are you making this movie so fucking stupid by doing this to us? Why aren't you realizing that what he does doesn't justify his character in any way, as we see later when he begs to Elsa to try and stop this after she realized what she did to her own people after her capture. Like, you see he's trying to connect with her, but you know that's not his intentions finally because he wants to kill her, probably reasoning with her to get it done before he finally commits to doing so, which actually thinking about it makes him more stupid as well, because this is where events get worse, where the twist finally gets revealed to us after Kristoff sadly hands Anna back to the kingdom after caring for her suddenly, with no time seen to actually flesh out the love that they want to show us now because of the poorly written love story that Hans has in being the fact of the twist villain we've been waiting for.
Oh, Anna. If only there was someone out there who loved you.
How the fuck is this scene getting worse when rewatching it? Like, even after everything we've learned up to this point, it just feels so out of place more than you think with the knowledge of this very twist. Everything that is wrong with this film is really related to the scene in every single way, because he changes his entire demeanor and attitude where it just feels so out of place within the entire story. The justification of being upset that he's last in line to the throne literally makes no sense when considering his entire connection with Anna that he had, that you actually felt. You actually felt they actually had a relationship and romance, and now they just ruined it because they made him the villain, and of course wanting Kristoff to be the relationship that Anna has in the final film. This scene just sets up so many events that are illogical to his entire planning, like the one we just talked about earlier that he mentions here.
All that's left now is to kill Elsa and bring back Summer.
Him saying this actually makes no sense whatsoever because he doesn't know that this is going to bring back Summer in any way, that this would actually probably make things worse because of how uncontrollable her powers really are, that he only brushed aside because she admitted she cannot actually control or stop the winter, because of the fact of what she's went through emotionally that she is supposed to learn as the villain of this very story, which was redirected into this character to subvert all expectations in Disney storytelling, where it clearly shows how much that never really worked. He really thinks he would be hailed as a hero, but doesn't actually think much about what could possibly happen, and that just makes his turn to a comical villain worse than you think.
You won't get away with this.
I already have.
No, you haven't. You have not actually committed your entire plan as of this point, and we still do not know if it's going to work at all, you fucking dumbass. There's nothing that can be done to justify that, to make this his entire personality when you take into context every scene before and after this. Even his conversation with the dignitaries feels like he couldn't stop it because that's not her true love, feeling so different from this despite his own manipulations. I mean, it can work in the sense of what I just said, but the film never really thought about doing that, of just making him fail, where it just rushed to fill in these details to justify their changes, where it never really worked other than the resolution of Elsa and Anna's characters, which was clearly there from the beginning of the production of the film. This is where the Duke is also made hollow as a character, no longer important and villainous other than retaining the stop Elsa attitude he has for the entire story. Not important or villainous at all, because it dropped that in favor of this dumbass with this painfully mediocre story that they wanted to tell. This really affects everything for the worse except for the resolution of the love portion of the film, because this moment is still fine on its own, powerful enough to redeem Elsa's character, where it virtually finishes both our hero and villain's arc to redeem themselves to discover what is important all along, but it's still all muddled under this twist villain that ruins the impact of the third act of the film. It just feels so jumbled together that you really can't appreciate the film as much anymore and the actual overall resolution for the characters, because in this instance you really realize how absurd some of these animated shots are, like how she finally sees how love thaws and making her control her powers, where somehow despite being on a frozen fjord of water with no ships except the one surrounding them, they managed to find themselves on one in the end. Like, no, that really doesn't make any sense because it was clear that they were on frozen water and not on a wooden boat. They were just on ice and nothing else, where at the very least she could have kept their ice surrounding them to stay afloat, and making you wonder why they actually cut out the Duke in some of these emotional sequences. I mentioned this in my Hans video, where you know he was up there on the balcony with the other dignitaries, but he's actually not. But then he's there again, but then he's not. Like, why are you doing that? Is it because he is a villainous character that tried to kill Elsa? Because it really doesn't make any sense for you to cut him out of the scene because he's clearly there up with them, so you know that they can make him realize that he was wrong in the moment for the character that he was, that suggests at his final defeat. I mean, these are very minor nitpicky complaints too, but every other major problem that the film has really heightens the awareness that shouldn't actually be there with these various decisions. Like when you notice that, you actually have to question why they're not involving them there. And taking into context the other content makes you feel somewhat bad for Hans because the book said he was abused by his own family, namely his brothers and his father, but the film gladly sends him back to them because he was the villain all along, making everything about him worse than needs to be because he's probably going to be abused by his older brothers and other family members. This was something I also mentioned in the Hans video, where if you realize that, there's no way you should feel sympathetic for Hans in any way because this film never wanted to do that and contradict the reasoning for everything else he has to actually offer. This is where you realize how both of these villains are going into a pathetic whimper because they never really were important to the overall story, where Elsa was the villain and that was very clear from the start. And finally, I really have nothing to say for the end sequence of the film because it's fine overall, except for the unrewarded romance that was Kristoff and Anna that still pales into comparison to what Tango had that was only released 3 years earlier and had a cameo for them in the film. Like when you realize both of their relationships in the end and overall events of the film, then you just see how painfully stupid it is because Kristoff has no real character development to him overall compared to our main ones. Finally just here because he helped out and that was it. And that is sad because that is something that would continue on in the next film. And of course, eventually for other characters. So basically, looking back on this, Frozen remains to be an actually pathetically mediocre mess that was all due to changing Elsa from being the very villain of the film. Because if she remained to be the primary villain, then I really think the movie wouldn't have these various issues with the rushed decisions like Hans being forced into view because of Let It Go. Like I said, Frozen isn't a bad film. It's a film I used to love and used to hold as one of my favorites, but it is clearly flawed in a lot of aspects that could have been resolved by fleshing it out and sticking to the original plan for that very story. Because when you take into context how much Elsa was the villain and most of the story's original drafts, then you see how painful the final decisions of the movie really were. She isn't bad overall with what we got, but just not good either because of those various villain routes that contradict where she is at as a character that affected the ideas that they had for others that ended up. How the trolls were flawed minor villains, how Kristoff was not actually very important in the story, and how Hans was absolutely pathetic and should have remained a supporting character instead. All in all, Frozen actually still is a fun and nice change for Disney to have during the time that solidified how they were still capturing the hearts of millions across the world in this new modern era, but nowadays just showed the clear lack of overall planning for their final products that was made. I may not love it now, but I certainly have fun hating on it now to showcase the incompetence of Disney when it comes down to rushing all of their movie products here, and at the very least, it can't say it's not Frozen 2, which is way worse, where I have a lot more to say about it, which really makes this a masterpiece in its own right. And that is something you can all look forward to in the future because I do really think it's one of the worst sequels of all time. And with that said, Frozen remains to be a seriously flawed film that still remains to be good overall, and I'm all done, so goodbye.